let's jump in. Let's talk, the structure of tonight. We're going to be talking about what it means to have balance, looking at dynamic balances. And we're going to send you a copy of this recording. So if, any slides you want to go back and forth to, we'll send you a link. You can be able to go back and forth, look at the deck. And we're going to have a Q&A session at the end. But I have my Q&A window open. So if you want, you can load questions up. I promise when the slides are done, I will answer every question you field in there. So that is it. Let's jump right in. So my perception that a lot of students, many, not all, but many kids are experiencing high school or college or middle school that they're not in the ideal alignment or balance. And the students I work with, for sure, they come to me, some of them are in crisis, some of them are struggling. There's a lack of balance just embedded in their lives. And so part of it, when balance is off, some kids are suffering, they're straining, they're running, they're working really hard. Some kids are just missing out on other things. They're so focused in one area, they're not developing other areas. And what could be a very positive time for students, high school can be lovely memories, or it can become a very stressful thing, and kids get exhausted and they're nervous, they're anxious, overworked, and then they're like just kind of burnt out by the time they're seniors. And that isn't a great thing. And in my experience of it is kids are working harder now than they have worked before. I look at the number of AP classes being taken, the degree of academic rigor that kids are experiencing now in high school. It blows away what I remembered in the 90s and the 80s, and probably when you were kids. It's just a more rigorous time. That I would take a couple APs a year, I think 7 total. Kids now, I'm working with, some of them are taking 11 APs or 12 APs. I was like, what are you doing? And they're missing out on other activities because they're working their tails off. Many of them trying to manage the load of academic work and homework and so forth. So my sense is that we've lost something, and especially when kids are not healthy and happy, something is missing, because high school and college can be a time that's healthy and happy. And so often my job is trying to help talk about alignment and balance again with these kids. So the pressures, and some of you may, know this, there's a lot of overscheduled kids who I see, who some of them are really struggling, really working. They're nervous about their performance academically, and, they're placed in the pecking order. Many of them, I'd say the majority of the kids I work with, they have a heavier load on average than kids I saw 20 years ago when I began doing this work. And the pressure sets in pretty early. I know there's a lot of overscheduling, even with younger kids. And things have definitely changed. I talked to my friends about the house day on days of, we used to ride our bikes around the neighborhood, and it was more open and more free and less structured. There was less parental oversight of our time in our schedules. But now there's a lot more scheduling, a lot less walking around the neighborhood, riding bikes to and from your friends' houses for the whole afternoon, going to the pool. A lot more scheduled stuff. And so things are different. I know that, but I still feel like the balance still could be adjusted and worked on. One of my colleagues and friends, he is a head of counseling and psychology services over at the Emory Oxford campus. And he talks about this idea that, the problem is not the individual fish. It's not this kid or this family. It's really the water, the environment, the context in which kids are being raised. And there have been movies about this thing, like the Race to Nowhere and other questioning, like Waiting for Superman, like all the struggles that we're having and what's going on, and why are kids, and right now we're in the middle of this epidemic of mental health for teenagers. And you may know some, I know some very personally, very close to me, friends, and who have kids who went through a very hard time. Some of them are dealing with anxiety, some of them are dealing with depression, other some even suicidal ideation, which is the extreme, but it's real. I've had talks with close friends about this stuff with their own kids. And so I think there's something in the water in terms of, some of the pressures, some of the lack of, balance and lack of a release valve for some kids, and activities which bring things down, calm things down when the pressures are up. And so I think the systemic pressures are really, they're out there. And so it's being mindful and watching. And of course, there's social media and there's performance and all the stuff out there apart from academics. But definitely, there's something that's off in my experience with a lot of kids right now. That's why, my friends who are psychiatrists, counselors, their dance cards are full. I have a friend who's a child psychiatrist. She's booked for months a dear friend of mine. So when it comes to competitive pressures and the sense of where I fit, are my grades good enough to be working harder? The answer is, for most people, it's not the answer. You leave the whole system and go do homeschooling or get out of that environment. And that works for some. But a lot of parents and kids, they want to work within the system, but try to, kind of step off the gas a little bit, apply a little bit of the brake to protect their kids from some of the pressures, but still, stay on the path socially that they're on. So the things for this talk, looking at what balance means, I want to talk about this definition of balance, talking about achievement, how we frame it and perceive it, and also mental health, looking at all these different components that are all interconnected, of course. So balance is an individual thing, and it's a dynamic and shifting concept. And what the balance of a student in 9th grade is very different than in 11th, and then when they're in college. I talk to all my kids about that. I work with students who are going to be facing that high school to college transition. And I talk about how your life's going to really open up. Like you have more hours in the day. When you're in high school, especially as a junior and senior, things are pretty intense. And once you're in college, unless you overschedule yourself, you're going to have more space. There's going to be more openness, for socialization, for hanging out, for even, scheduling things when it makes sense for you in terms of your own circadian rhythm. And as long as you don't overdo it. And a lot of my kids start off freshman year and it's like, hey, there are 5 classes, looking 6, like back off that, go for 4. Let's make some room so you can go in there, enjoy, have the space, and then figure out, can I handle a 5th versus going in out of the gate, guns blazing, and maybe too much. So the balancing act that kids are going through is academic achievement. Almost all the kids they're aware that they're in a competitive, environment. Kids are vying for limited spots. I think students are aware now that college is more, these schools that are selective are more selective than they used to be. And kids feel that they have to work harder. And there's an awareness of that. I just had a long talk last week, about 2 hours over a series of days of one of my good friends. His daughter didn't get into University of Texas, and they wanted to go forever and multiple legacies and even multiple generational legacies. And the kid did everything right, got all the grades, all the academic rigor, the activities was all there, and they got denied from UNC and denied from Texas. And there was a real kind of crisis point in terms of we've done everything right, we have all the achievement, and then we didn't get this outcome that we desired and what that means. And so sometimes people are myopically pursuing, if I do everything right, I'll get this thing at the end, and not always. And part of it is along the journey, the path of high school, and if you're doing all this for this one goal, nothing is guaranteed, especially for these schools that are super selective. And so then it's like, what have you sacrificed? What have you, and for what? If you were just going to end up at Georgia or at this school, in terms of how many weekends, nights did you trade? And then was it all for this one thing? And so kids are thinking about that. Do I have enough rigor? Do I have the grades? They're planning ahead, but also the balancing act of your social life and activities. I know students, I work with some who their parents are concerned about their level of social activity. They're not having enough time with friends. And I don't want the parents social engineering and trying to create and make. The kids have to forge their way once they're in high school. But definitely, I've seen it where students are too focused in one area and they're not developing skills, which are going to be life skills in other areas. So you want to maintain the balance there. Time with family is really important because, it can't be all peers all the time. Your peers are more important when your kids are in high school than when they're younger. But mom and dad can have a evening, leveling influence. Some of the wisdom that you bring from your life experience that their peers don't have. Their peers are lovely and amazing, and they're not your parents. But we can also bring we can kind of modulate and tamp down some of the crazy or anxiety, some of the pressures that kids feel with our experiences. Understanding there's not just one right outcome in the world, and there are a range of outcomes, and it's okay. And we can be the calming force. Kids need to be taking care of their physical health. I saw, especially in the pandemic, when kids stopped taking care of their bodies as much and they weren't doing physical education, their sport got canceled. And I saw a number of kids begin to do worse in every aspect of life. They began to do worse academically. They began to do worse emotionally, regulation. So physical activity, it's not more than just for your body. It's for your grades and for your mind too, and for your health. Then intellectual stimulation. Sometimes kids if they're bored in school, they need something that gets them turned on and juiced up, and making sure there's something that gets that spark going for kids. and then just play and fun. This can happen, the lack of fun, lack of play can hit a kid in 11th grade, in 10th grade. I shouldn't hit kids as sophomores in college when there's just not enough fun. And this starts to affect kids emotionally. And you become less resilient when you're not playing, having fun, laughing, when it's all just, tedium and doldrum and just work. Yeah, things can go south. I've seen kids even, fall out of school, and when they're not having, you can have too much fun. All this can be out of balance. It can be nothing but fun, and higher risk things, and you're neglecting your academics. I've seen that go. I've seen kids drop out of school that way, but also I've seen kids on burnout who needed a gap year, needed time away because it was just, they're miserable. I've seen kids transfer out of school, because they weren't having a good time where they were. So we're trying to, keep all of this in balance. One thing I like a lot, my former therapist and friend, she had me fill out this life wheel, and we're talking about how's your life going, and there's a conversation, but also just filling it in, the 1 through 10, and the different spikes. How are things going for you physically? Are you taking care of yourself? Does your body feel good, healthy, eating, sleeping, so forth? How are you doing intellectual growth, stimulation? You feel like you're engaged, interested, inspired? How are things going with your family? You have time, not enough time? How are things going socially with your friends? 1 to 10. Academically, do you feel like you're doing great? Are you struggling? Is it really a disaster? And how much fun are you having? Do you feel like there's enough fun where you feel that you're recharged, you get to play and laugh and have your inner kid come out and experience things? And then there's, you could include spirituality. How is that? Your relationship with something other than yourself and something bigger than yourself. How are these different measures? And you could look at the life wheel and, could this wheel roll? Is it going to be, or is it really going to be uneven? And this is, it's a conversation, but it's simply a tool. You can have kids take 5 minutes to fill it in. And then we look back at it and say, what should we work on? I need more fun. Okay. I should probably focus more on my academics. Okay. I probably need more time, taking care of my body, exercising, playing. One of my students in college, he needed more time by himself. He needed more time in nature. And so we said, I'm going to structure an hour a week. You're going fishing. I asked him, what restores you? What revitalizes? He was just in his room working. And it's like, I need time out in nature to restore and recharge. So let's put that in the calendar. Let's calendar that versus having it be some abstract, I know this is good for me, but it's not scheduled. So we began to treat those things, that time in the woods, fishing by a lake, that's what you need. So that's going to be on Thursdays at this time between your classes, and that's now scheduled. So things like this, it's simply, you can bring your kids this little thing, fill it in, takes a few minutes. All right. And achievement is something you have to really personalize. And what does it mean? I ask students, what does it mean to be successful? And there's a whole range of things as a student in life. And what do you want for yourself? Well, not what do your parents want for you, but what do you want? So we frame things in that regard, given your challenges. And it could be, I have certain kids who have certain learning differences. They're dealing with, some kids have dyslexia and they have, auditory processing, and they have some ADHD. Like, okay, what GPA do you believe you could attain? And what is your goal? Not, I want a 4.0. Like, no. Given your constraints, limitations, your time, your priorities, your other activities, what's your goal? And sometimes, like, I'm going to get a B in it. I'm getting a B in math, but not a C. I'm going to get a solid B in physics. I'm shooting for a high B in history, but the rest, I want A's. I want an A in computer science. I want an A in Spanish. I want an A in English, an A. And so it's, getting a sense of other kids. No, like, I'm going for all B's. I've had kids in college who the goal was simply, I want to get off academic probation. And after I'm off probation, life is good. So that means I can't get C's, and that's success. Doesn't have to be A's. It's just understanding where you're starting from, what your goal is, and what achievement means. And then navigating that, if your kid's achievement definition is different than yours. And that's something interesting. It's like, if your kids aren't as academically oriented as you are, it could be a double JD, PhD family, but then your kids, you realize, may not love school, or may have other interests, other things that are, in school is down here. Whereas for you were an all A student, all APs, and your kids are different. And so your balance, you remember, could be very different and if you have more than one kid, if you have 3 or 4, you begin seeing how your DNA combines in different ways, and you have a super academic kid, but also in terms of family constellation. You have your all-star firstborn, then the middle one may be a little bit less academically inclined, or it could be your third one is the baby and chilling out, or super ambitious. It varies from family to family. So achievement varies, and how we define it really matters. And I just always want to be careful of defining success and achievement in too narrow of a range, that we're not including other things. It can't just be, I'm defining it as a GPA. And whenever I ask students, what are your goals? Parents hire me and my colleagues at Applerouth. I'm an executive functioning coach. Like, I help them balance. I help them try to figure out what they need, their resources, and so forth. And I ask them, like, what do you want this semester? What's going to make you happy? And what's going to be, looking back, this was a good semester for me. And a lot of my students, if not all of them, are looking at their social activity and having fun as being a key priority. My kids in college, my kid in Michigan, my kid up in Boston, Northeastern, it's like, I want to have fun. They understand that these experiences, like being a college student, it's a pretty short window, and they get it. Then they're in the world of work and they may go back for grad school, but there's a little window, and they understand I've all my peers and I have all this time and space. I want to enjoy this time, not just be myopically focused on, I'm going to leave here with a 3.9 going to grad school. And most people who I know who tore through undergrad or just got a super high GPA or left early, they're like, why did I do that? I used all my APs and I finished in 2.5 years or 3, unless there's some economic imperative. Ultimately, like, I just kind of left behind that 1.5 years of college that could have been spacious and fun and enriching. And so the kids now I'm working with who are 18, 19, they all understand that I want grades good enough that I could have opportunities for, internships, jobs, grad school, but also I want to have fun. The same thing with my student. I saw him yesterday. He's a freshman in high school, and his goal is I want to get good enough grades, not a 4.0, but also I want to have fun. I want to enjoy myself and enjoy this time. So to me, these are very, very valid, meaningful goals. And just be careful if it's just one thing. If it's only having fun, then there's some, make sure you're thinking about longer term as well. But also if it's only long term, that's when there's a buildup of anxiety and pressure and stress. So you have to balance today and tomorrow, current happiness, future happiness and opportunities, and being mindful of all this. So we don't want to just look at one variable, maximize rigor, max GPA, maximizing an activity or two. I've seen kids burn out. It's super competitive, club level athletics. So they're just, and it can happen later. They can get injured. I've seen that too. But if I'm going on tournaments and I'm going on, these showcases for recruitment, and I'm just every weekend I'm just running and running and running. That some kids are great at that and they love it and there's passion. Some kids it's a lot, and then other things get squeezed out. And so again, success isn't only getting into the highest selective caliber of college, or looking at, am I happy now, as well as I'm going to be happy then. And the idea that I'm going to be happy when, that's a very slippery slope, as we all know in life. It's the idea when this happens, then I'll be happy then. It's like, no, if you're not happy now, the odds are you're not going to be happy then. And so learning about the journey and the happiness in a moment. And so the treadmill of performance, just be careful. If kids are on it now, some of them may bring that forward. And there is an epidemic of stress and anxiety and depression. It's even bigger in college than high school. People who feel overwhelmed and nervous and scared. So trying to build good habits in high school and even younger, so they carry them forward, and they need fewer mental health services once they're in college if they have more of a balance in life. I just throw in a slide just showing some of the growth in APs. And to me, the biggest thing, I live in Georgia, I live in Atlanta. I've been working here since 2001. And kids getting into Georgia used to need 2 or 3 APs to be competitive. And the early action outcomes, which came out in December for Georgia, are nuts. Like the middle 50 percentile of students who got into early action in Georgia have between 8 and 13 APs. That means 1/4 of kids had more. And which is like, how's that? It's either APs, IBs, or dual enrollment. I'm like, the level of rigor, I'm like, my God, what's being lost? And one thing that's being lost, kids are doing less time in person socialization than Gen Xers. They're having fewer first-time jobs in high school than we did. They're going to fewer parties. There are a lot of things that are not happening, and there's more digital engagement, online engagement, but a lot less of the in-person kind of stuff. And so I don't know, but some of the rigorous, some of it's social media on our phone, some of it is greater academic loads. For sure, kids are doing more homework now on average than they were 25 years ago. That's On average, there are certain schools that have different philosophies about homework and assignments. And so there is a shadow side of too much focus on performance. I could talk to my colleague, Dr. Carrie Poley, and she's a child psychiatrist, and also deals with eating disorders. And kids who are overly, overworked, too much pressure, their anxiety, depression, self-harm, that's real. One of my colleagues and teachers wrote my recommendation for my counseling degree. Her entire practice was high school kids at the top 3 private schools here in Atlanta, kids who came with all eating disorders, self-harm, depression, and they were all, high performance schools, smart kids. And she had a waiting list, all from these 3 top private schools. And so there's pressure, but there's a shadow side of trying to compete and keep up and stay ahead. And so I'm always wary of that. I've seen kids, I've seen people close to me get involved in eating disorders and dealing with pressure, trying to control something. And they control their food, or they do the self-harm and the cutting. And, a lot of kids cut, surprisingly, like too many. But again, they're balancing some of the pressures to perform. And this is something that I can control. And this is something, I've heard one of my students say this. I'm going to grind through 10th, grind through 11th, first semester. And when I get the college letter for acceptance, I can finally enjoy high school before going to college. Heard that, and it's like, that is the saddest thing. They're like, wow, that was your high school. And the idea of this is what it's going to be like, this treadmill. And then something again is lost when this is the name of the game. That's success. So, and then trying to do all the things is a challenge. I think as parents, we can bring that level down, because if you're trying to do everything right, you're also going to miss. You may not take certain risks that don't fill the resume, but it could be an amazing experience. It could be an amazing growing experience. People who are just thinking about the common app activities, like what's my list, versus no, like what's my life, not I'm going to perform and give you this piece of paper and this defines me. Because there are some of the most amazing experiences are not going to end up on that common app list of activities or achievements. And so thinking about that, again, conversations. And then I've seen this, I've experienced this, kids get into the best school, Ivy League schools, amazing schools, and then they're miserable. And they transfer out, or they drop down, they go back home. That's real too. So there's a national survey of college collegiate health is showing you some of the increases popping. There's more stress, more anxiety in college, more depression, things like that. And that's real. So just being mindful that it's high school, but they measure it a lot more in college, because they get the surveys and forums, and they do a massive 200,000 kids survey every year up at Michigan and other places. So one of the biggest reframe I like to do is talking about balance and talking about getting off the treadmill of status and performance towards development and health and well-being, and building a healthy adult who has healthy boundaries around play and work and self and socialization and friendship and love and connection, versus just performing. And how narrow that is. I try to reframe it. And sometimes B's are great. Sometimes not taking the AP is awesome. Sometimes dropping the minor is the right thing to do, or dropping the activity, and versus the health and well-being and balance of this kid. Let's broaden how we define success, thinking about growth and development and character. And the relationships are primary. If the student is working too hard and they're not making good friendships, that stinks, because the friendships they're going to need them, especially when in times of stress and times of crisis. We need our friends, and our friends make us more resilient. That network of people who care about us, they're the ones who keep us sane and keep us healthy and keep us going when times are hard. And so if our kids are not developing, cultivating good friendships, I think something's off. You don't need 1,000 friends. I had one mom talk to me about her kid was not being included on all the text chains or group chains, or it's like, you don't need to have 30 friends, but you need 2 or 3, at least one good friend, someone who gets you, sees you, and validates you. That person's an important, to your self-structure, to your, ego needs. You need someone to see you and get you. Otherwise, I think of that Dear Evan Hansen, that movie or the musical, but you need someone to be there who gets you. So not getting too hung up on GPA performance academically, thinking about, your emotion, your development, your emotional development, emotional regulation, relationships, how to manage stress, being resilient. This is, I think, more important than your GPA. And there are kids who get, again, Angela Duckworth, she's a professor at Penn. She studied with the luminary Marty Seligman, and her big book was Grit. That was her main contribution. And she was looking at kids who didn't have the resilience, and they had the grades and the performance, but when things went wrong, they got the first big no, the first big rejection, things broke apart. And she called them fragile perfects. They never experienced real setbacks, real struggles, failure. And they never, and so they did collapse if things didn't, the first big rejection, and suddenly they get despondent. And so not just chasing a certain goal, but building emotional skills, building the ability to, grit its character. And thinking about health, talking about, are your kids healthy? Are you satisfied, centered, engaged? How's your life look? And some kids, it's not the best. Some kids it's great. Thinking about childhood as an important and a unique time, not just a means to an end of getting you towards this other thing of, no, this piece is really important. And I feel sad. I really felt sad for my students during the pandemic, the things that they didn't get. And we all had sacrifices, but the kids who were in this singular thing, they didn't get prom, they didn't get senior skip day, they didn't get, it's like, man, they lost their year playing tennis, or they're being a senior varsity player. There are things that were really upsetting. And I look at, this is a moment, and then college is a moment. College is a beautiful moment, can be, of self-discovery, exploration. You learn a few things here and there, but mostly it's this amazing bridge. You try things out. Your identity is not so fixed. You can attempt, and you can discover more of what you like, what you don't like, versus just, I'm focused, I'm driving through this thing to get to the next thing. It's like, whoa, slow down. And to me, balance, performance versus happiness, that's a key. So what are the conditions of happiness? Alfred Adler, brilliant fella out of the Vienna School, early 1900s, that's the Jung and Freud and Adler. And Adler, he was more pragmatic in many ways, and talked about like the primary tasks to be happy. And it's that your self-development, social, your friendships, work that's meaningful, that gives you, you can use your talents and abilities and have challenges, spirit, and then also love and connection. So for him, happiness, it's performance is a little bitty piece, but we're not going to be happy unless we're attending to all the other needs too. And a lot of it's human connection, meaning purpose, not just performance. And yeah, Joe Campbell, follow your bliss is lovely. I think we can't, it's important to go back to that. Happiness, and not necessarily, at a micro level, even following your bliss on a day-to-day, little things that give you joy and pleasure. Make sure there's room for that in your life. That's key. And some of the barriers, kids who are overscheduled, that's major. I see it all the time. Kids who are not getting enough sleep, that could be because of their little devices that can be throwing off their balance, or staying up too late on, whatever message board they're on. Technology and like performance culture, social media. Though I've heard some of my friends are saying they're seeing some cracks, that some of the young kids are even saying, hey guys, let's have phone downtime for a little bit. Some of them are realizing that you could spend like 7 hours a day on our phones is probably too much. And maybe when we're all together looking at our screens, something is missing. So we kind of lost the boundary when all things exploded, but some of the younger kids are starting to see maybe we need some. There was an article, I think, in the New York Times. I think I forwarded to a bunch of friends. It was about like the neo-Luddites. And there are some kids in high school who are going through flip phones. They don't want to be tied forever to their not all of them, but there's a movement. I think I encourage it very much, because they're realizing the whole performative culture there's a cost to it. So comparison culture, the stresses of, social friendships and pressures. And so are these things getting in the way of balance and happiness? Can we pare things down? Can we, renegotiate our boundaries with our devices? Are we sleeping with the phone? Is it downstairs in the cradle, being charged overnight? Are there other times without it? Are we looking at the schedules too is important. So as parents, as an EF coach, we want to help kids prioritize. So things that are really important, things that are less important. Making smart choices about classes and activities. And it's not always going for the most rigorous, but let's look at our past and how do we do with one advanced class? Do we jump to 4, or do we go with baby steps, even if that means, so maybe we're not going to go to the highest tier school. If I see some fissures, like my kid is either thriving or I'm not sure it's smart to push him into AP US, AP Chem, AP Calc BC, that may be a lot given what I've seen before versus what his peers are doing or what we need for UVA or something like that. Looking at, what can my kid handle? Making sure your kids have at least one thing that they really enjoy for them and don't take that away from them. Helping teach kids some strategies to manage anxiety and stressors. One of my good friends is doing that with his daughter right now, who's in middle school, and she's getting overworked. There are a lot of tears, and they, let's go see a counselor and learn some self-regulation skills, so some breathing activities, some cognitive behavioral interventions, some basic stuff, how to calm yourself down when you're feeling really worked up. You had a hard assignment, you have to bat in the test, things are before you start getting in the cycle of anxiety. So that's part of balance too, is having skills to get yourself back to center. And we can teach kids skills when they're 12, when they're 14, when they're in college. It's not, the doctoral level stuff, but some of it showing your kids how to do deep breathing, doing anything that's contemplative, that slows you down, stretching, yoga, things like that. I do Qigong, for the past 25 years plus, helps me get myself centered and grounded. So, 1,000 ways to get yourself back and, centered. Helping kids get their priorities, helping talk through priorities is important. Things that matter most, what success looks like for them, what's essential, got to get done, and what's extraneous. Even when I'm working with kids for a given evening homework session, what do we have to do today, do tomorrow? That's key. And then what can we push if we need to? If this takes longer than we estimated, helping kids calibrate. And so if it's getting late, let's put this away. But the important things are done. This one we can save for tomorrow at a free period or something else like that. So long-term goals. And one of the most important things I do as an EF coach is help just get rid of things off the schedule, help to pare things down. And oftentimes when kids come to me, there's just too much on the schedule and the plate, things that are not as important. And often it's like, you don't need all those clubs and activities. You need 1 or 2 where there's commitment, where there's growth, where there's leadership. But all those things, like the colleagues don't really care about filling every bit of that. And they're going to ask you, how many hours do you do that per week, per month, and I do it a few hours a month, but it's really no investment commitments. Can we get rid of that piece? Colleges are not going to care about that. So being thoughtful about that, often, doing 1 or 2 things well is more important than doing 15 things. And trying to find, like some kids say, I need an activity, a high impact activity versus no, like, what do you actually like? And let's try some stuff, experiment first, and then let's commit to a thing or 2, either over the summer or during the school year, where there's some joy for you, whether it's some interest that you have, and not just, I think this will look good. I think this is, if I'm performing, versus no, I actually like this, even if it may not look as good as that. This is being true to myself, and I can write an essay about that, and it becomes part of a coherent story of what I care about, even if it's different than what this person cares about. So being thoughtful, cutting things, dropping things, and choosing things that are really essential for the students. Don't overdo rigor. That's something when you're choosing courses, some of you already locked in for next year, but the year after, do I need to do the extra class? Could I push it in the summer? One of my kids at Michigan was starting off, and she was doing 5 classes, and there was a chem and a chem lab and a bio and bio lab, and she was pre-med. And just like, and then we talked it over, and she decided to push bio to the summer. Because there's gonna be too much work, and instead of bio, she did psychology, and like, this is way better. Now we have 4 classes, not 4 and 5 in the lab. And then suddenly he's like, now I can have fun. Now I can play, I can do frisbee, I can do other things, versus just I'm gonna go and knock out 3 of these big science prereqs on the first year. So thinking about that, less is often more. Back off. Every time I've had a student scale down on a class, it's been for the better, or push a class when things are, because often there's often one class taking a lot of your energy and it's making everything more stressful. So if we can take this class down or push it, then suddenly the world gets better. That's a way to often maintain balance. So I tell the story of, I was trying to finish my master's in counseling in 2 years with my other peers. I was also running my business, and I was working hard, running around, trying to do this 700-hour internship at Emory in their counseling department, and it was crazy. And I was tired and running around. My dad said, "Why don't you do it in 3 years?" And I was in my early 30s, and I was like, "I've got to finish this." And I didn't want to do, but you know what? The more I thought about it, I said, "You're right." And I pushed my classes. I did in 3 years. And then I signed up for a PhD, which took 7 more years. So the time became irrelevant. But it was again, the wise elder, as my father, pulling me aside, telling me that there's not really a race, and getting it done in 2 versus 3, in the grand scheme of it all, if you get more pleasure and there's less stress and chaos during this time, you'll enjoy this experience more. So do your internship at Emory, finish that up, then go do your coursework. And it's like, yeah, taking a little more time, doing it in 3, not 2, like nothing was lost and everything was gained. And it was just the experience of an older person who I was able to have that rapport with my father. And I knew he had my best interest at heart. And it was out of love and compassion, seeing me stressed when he'd been stressed before too. It's like, you seem like you're getting worn thin, and there is no race. It was someone telling me, there is no race. That was helpful. I felt this pressure to finish, like a compulsion, but then but why? Why not do the gap year? Why not go and take more time? Why not drop this and do it later if there's time, or do it in the summer? So that was helpful. I think my props for that. So top schools are looking at more than rigor and GPA also. So just being myopic, if you're looking at just the grades, you have to do other things. And there's character, there are other variables at play. Not just I have the highest GPA possible. Again, my student, my friend whose daughter didn't get into these top schools, the grades were there, the rigor was there, but it's still, in some cases, that there's a different equation. And this person may have been too focused on that, honestly. So help your kids, helping young people pay attention to what feeds them, encourage them to take risks, helping with structured reflection, and paying attention when there's interest and excitement, trying to encourage that. If you see some passion, because those things help them get through hard times when there's something they love to do. So encouraging exploration, and that's part of what college is, but also high school, trying things out, taking some risks. And then social life. Our friends are our lifeline. Our friends keep us healthy, get us through the hard things. And they keep us sane. The more friends we have, and not numbers, but if we have 3 or 4 quality connections, those things really solve for a lot, mental health and otherwise. So if we're cutting out time with our people, cutting out our friends, and I preface, it's quality time. It's versus the quick texts and sharing things. That's part of it, small part of it, but it's more the intimate, like actual talking to each other. And even in high school, you begin to be able to have really deep, meaningful friendships, which get deeper in college and adulthood. But even in high school, people even talk about what you're going through and being real with them. Being able to be real is great, to not perform. That's very, very important. And so if you lose your activity and social outlet, it's rarely a good thing. That's something we saw during the pandemic too. And that was not good for anyone, really. So encouraging kids, encouraging friendships, thinking about that as part of the balance, not just your grades as well. And again, teaching kids some mindfulness strategies, time in nature, these Eastern practices, moving your body, centering yourself, doing deep breathing, authentic relationships. All these things are good for maintaining health and balance. And then limits. These phones can suck up a lot. They can be very challenging. They're amazing tools, amazing resources, but they can get overused. And that can throw off the balance for everything, for activities and fun and restoration and sleep and self-care and so forth. So we know some research, Jean Twenge wrote a book, Monitoring the Future, that was looking at this Michigan study of over the past 40 years, kids' mental health. Things that are non-screen based tend to contribute to more happiness and less loneliness, more sleep, exercise, and sports, print media, reading a book or a magazine versus scrolling, in-person activities, and then going to some kind of membership, like meeting with groups of people. All those things make us happier and less lonely. So that's part of balance in my book. So encourage that, encourage balancing the screens, richer forms of engagement, of seeing a friend versus being on Snapchat with them. And there is definitely a place for screens, but also a massive place for being with people in an authentic way as mammals, not just looking at mediated by a screen or a device. Big things: exercise, sleep, your work, relationships. These are all part of a healthy adolescence and young adulthood. Make sure these are all being maintained, and if they're not, something is off. And then I mentioned before that the peer friendships, those do lower anxiety, and it's important that kids learn how to build the skills. Other things, diet, I haven't focused too much on, but balance in your food is meaningful. Kids who are using too much empty stuff and stimulants and, versus really good, healthy foods, kind of lower glycemic, like it's a slow burn versus really fast, high sugar stuff, high inflammatory stuff. Time outside in nature is really good for a lot of people. My students, myself. Exercise is good for 1,000 reasons. It resets the neurochemistry, serotonin, endorphin, dopamine. It lowers cortisol. There's so much good stuff when you exercise, and cardiovascular fitness. Human touch is one of the best things for lowering anxiety. Petting your dog kind of brings down your blood pressure. It's so animals, any touch as mammals is good for us. Like good touch, obviously, helps us calm ourselves, center ourselves down. A good hug, all those things. All right, time outside. And then leaving some empty space. There is a tendency in this day and age to fill in the gaps, to fill in the spaces, and having times without, having times with our phones off, information not bombarding us is really good for our brains and our reticular activating systems and our default mode network, just to have time when things aren't coming at us, or we're in ourselves. And that's often when our best ideas come to us, our little voice talks to us and tells us how we're doing, when we actually turn off all the external stimuli and inputs. So time in our own space without things coming to us, I think, is essential. And I would say that's also a part of balance, turning off this constant stream of information and input and media, having time in our own, to get to know ourselves, our inner worlds. That, because if we just keep drowning our inner worlds out, eventually it's going to come back and often can bite us. We can just keep driving. The pauses really are important. Applerouth, we work on the art of human connection, science of learning. That's what we do. We offer a few things: academic tutoring, test prep, and EF coaching. I'm going to pause for a moment, and I'm going to have Peter throw a poll out real quick. It'll take you literally 15 seconds, maybe 20 seconds. Are you a student, a parent, educator? And then if you are, where are you on the pipeline? Are you a high school senior, junior, sophomore, freshman, middle school? And then, do you want any help in these areas? And if so, do you want someone to reach out to you? Yes or no? Very simple, and that gives a sense of who you are. Thank you for that. And now and there's one more thing, is to throw this out, because part of the work I do as an EF coach is talking about balance. It's part of the work. And one thing that we do is coaching with kids, and we're offering these diagnostic packages where you can actually get a free diagnostic and schedule a talk, all these things. So this is something that we actually use, this kind of comprehensive diagnostic, looking at kids and looking at how they're studying and so forth. All right, so we have this is available to you if you feel no risk way to try our coaching. All right, let me pause for a moment, and let's open up the door to questions and answers. I see we already have several already in there. What if we regret not piling on the rigor, taking loads of APs and participating in ECs in high school once we get to college? Wow, you regret not piling on it once you get to college. I don't know. If you have regrets, I'm trying to think of the source of those regrets, because ideally, if you didn't pile things on and you didn't just fill everything, once you get to college, are you going to be missing an opportunity to go to a more prestigious college, a higher level college, or is it you missed opportunities? Because loads of rigor, there are students for whom loads of rigor is perfect, and I've seen students who are super high performers, and they did great, and they love the challenge, and they're able to do everything and maintain the balance. But not all students are in that group. Often the kids I work with for EF coaching are not. It's not going in that direction. So I think it's really very individual and very specific. But it's hard to say for me if in terms of any regrets. I feel like you're gonna have to calibrate and balance. If it's too easy and you need more challenge, go and get more challenge. Definitely ramp it up. It's just, my thing is, don't turn it on too fast. Don't push so hard before you calibrate and know how you do. Because to me, there's a bigger risk of being overextended, overstressed, overwhelmed, not happy, then I feel like, wow, my level of challenge is just too low. But for sure, if you're in that category, so I think experiment, try a little bit versus let's go full on, let's go from 0 to 4 APs and we're doing this. And it's like, are you sure? And I'm going to do 5 activities versus like, are you sure? I'm going to commit to all these things versus can we put our toe in the water and try it before we totally go all in? I've seen it work. I've seen it backfire. I just try to minimize the amount of chaos and stress that that can be created. Are there tips on getting an internship at Emory? Well, that was part of my graduate school. I applied for it. I was getting a master's in counseling at Georgia State. And so I reached out to the counseling office at Emory and I signed up for an internship. I had to do like 700 hours of internship. That it was not for high school. I reached out. I mean, I put together a resume. I did an interview, made sure it was a good fit. And then I worked for a year at Emory at the counseling office. That was good. But yeah, otherwise, other tips, it's going to be reaching out to them, showing up, calling them, talking to them. If you want to intern, it's good to show up and if you know people there, it's always good. But showing up is better than emailing or texting, in my experience. Make sure they can see a face and know you're sincere and serious. Back to the first question. What if we're afraid of regretting not doing those things in the future? It's interesting, being afraid of regretting. If I had taken more academically rigorous classes, if only I had done more activities. I mean, I so rarely, I'm not as familiar with people who look back and said, man, I didn't push hard enough. I don't know that many people who had that experience. If only I pushed harder in terms of the regrets. But you could be the kind of person who if this is a thing, then let's err on the side of more rigor. If you're worried that you're going to feel like you really missed out. Like in many years, like when kids look back, it's often not like I took a lot of academically rigorous classes. They had a great teacher who they connected with. Not I did a bunch of rigor, but no, you'll forget a lot of your teachers. Happens, it's very natural versus I remember this activity that I loved. I did 15 activities, but I found one that I loved and that defined high school, that defined college. I did a cappella in college, and I look back, I remember like 4 teachers vividly who were life-changing. And I remember my a cappella group, and a lot of it is kind of a blur. And also going abroad, that was life-changing. That was beautiful. And I would have regretted dramatically not going abroad if I was trying to cram in another major or it's like another minor. It's like that the experiences are what we remember, and the really great teachers. Not I did a bunch of really advanced classes. So I don't know if you're going to regret. In my experiences, there are a few students I've worked with who really regret not pushing more rigor and not regret pushing more activities versus doing things they really cared about and finding teachers that were really, they engage them, they're passionate about. So like the amount, I don't know people who have looked back and said, I didn't have enough, but it really is, it's the quality. I think that to me is an important piece. It's the quality, not the number of classes. What advice would you give for a high school student who isn't academically inclined and isn't passionate about any of the classes at school? How would you motivate the student? That's a whole different topic. Motivation, part of it is, intrinsic motivation is always better, but trying to find a way for them to realize that the performance they do, what's more extrinsic motivation, that they need a certain, if they want to go to these schools and college, have these experiences, well, let's look at the requirements and look at the average incoming freshman class and realize, okay, so they do want to see a certain level of academic performance. If you do want to go to Boston or go to these schools or go to this school in the SEC or Alabama or Georgia, here's what they want. And are you willing to pay the price to get that thing that you say you want? And so the understanding there's a cost to everything in life. And are you willing to pay that price? That can be motivating. Otherwise, though, trying to find things they enjoy, trying to make it more intrinsic because it's always easier when you like it, trying to find better teachers. But you're right, some kids, they're not feeling it. Some kids, they turn on in college. Some kids, they turn on in grad school. Some kids, academically, they're going to be lifelong learners, but outside of the classroom. That's a real thing too. Some kids don't like the formal schooling. They're better as independent learners and, self-regulated learners. So I get that. But otherwise, the motivation, sometimes a college visit turns on the fire. And they realize I had a great time. It's really cool. But I realized, if I want that school, I have to perform at this level to make that a possibility. It's something that will just happen if I don't actually show up, do the work, and so forth. So that is purely the extrinsic motivation, but sometimes that's meaningful. Yeah, I wouldn't typically pay for grades or do other carrot and stick kind of motivators, but the kid has to have it. So it's so hard to limit social media texting on the phones during school nights because they feel this is how they communicate. Do you have any recommendations on how many minutes, hours are reasonable for social media texting, FaceTime during school nights? And it's going to depend on the kid. I think it's a very reasonable thing that at a certain hour, it all turns off. At a certain hour, it could be 10 o'clock. It could be the phones go downstairs. They're locked in the cradle. And also, with my kids I'm working with, and some of them do use their phones. Like they say, I'm on Snapchat, like, there's something I don't understand. I go on Parlor and talk to some friends about certain things. When it's work-based, that's okay. But what I always want is a separation if I can do it. When kids have their apps open, their Instagram open, all the stuff open, they're WhatsApping their friends, they're trying to work, it's going to take longer. It's not going to be as good. They're going to process and encode the information in a more shallow way, so it's not encoded to long-term memory. Like everything gets diminished and everything is worse when kids are trying to do two things with the screens open. And very few people can parallel process or multitask. 98% of people are monotaskers. And if I try to do more than one thing, I'm going to diminish the quality on both experiences. So this is a conversation. And once they're in high school, once they're already like a junior, yeah, it's hard to take the phone. Like you can get versus let's have a conversation of how are things going, how you feel, what are the trade-offs if you're just on this device, like how do you feel when you put it down after 3 hours scrolling, talking, chatting? And some kids may feel, I feel connected, I love it's perfect, versus other things that were squeezed out, did the balance get off? But I think it's very reasonable to say at night, at a certain threshold, a certain time, the phones go downstairs. Otherwise, it can cut into sleep and other things, and then mood and self-regulation. So I think as a parent, my kids are very little. I started parenting late, and my oldest kid is 47. But ultimately, my plan is to have a boundary limit, say after this time. And some families like shut down the Wi-Fi, or there are certain things, but I rather just we all dock our phones, and you modeling that, like my wife and I, we dock our phones. They'll come with us into the bedroom. That's a phone off limits place versus having the phone be last thing you touch at night. So I think we model good boundaries to our kids, and there's a better chance they'll actually go with that and learn from us. That makes sense. Thank you for answering my questions. Yeah, no problem. My pleasure. What you say is the point most teen students you work with developed an intrinsic motivation towards academic rigor. What I say is the point. Did most of the kids I work with develop intrinsic motivation towards academic rigor? Not all. Some of the kids love to learn. They found teachers that work for them. And there's going to be a class or two. Hopefully the balance is right, where it's not all drudgery. Where there's a class or two you love and you look forward to, and then some things you have to do. It's a requirement. It's a core for the major, for just for graduation requirements. And we find a way to get through those things and make it as less painful as possible. But in terms of for really being intrinsically motivated, if I enjoy this, I can't always turn that on. But I try to do things that, like I'm working with a student right now. He's up in Boston at Northeastern, and he's doing 4 classes. One of them is doing a Zoom, an online class. He's realizing it's so hard for him to focus, stay attention, pay online. So going forward, never again, only in person, in these kind of classes. And so it's just trying to figure out what formats do I struggle in? What formats am I happy in? What kinds of classes, larger format or smaller format? Where am I better? But then some kids, it's just going to be extrinsic. I need to get a certain GPA. If I want to go to Georgia, I want to go to Virginia, I want to get into NYU, I want to get into whatever school I'm looking at, or UC, Santa Cruz. I need this threshold. I need this number of grades, this amount of rigor. And because I want to be in that physical location, I want to experience those athletics, the activities, the weather, whatever it is. And that becomes the carrot, that becomes the motivator. But not, I love this for the sake of doing it. That may not happen for all kids, but I try to figure out how do I get them to the goal as efficiently as possible and make it as pain-free as possible. So part of our work as EF coaches is helping them become more proficient. How do we study more efficiently? How do I, not do inefficient, wasteful things? How do I get there faster so it's less painful and they have more time for their social activity and everything else? If I can just get you your work done more quickly, more efficiently. So I am on their sides in that regard. I don't see how this is so hard. Even with my high school senior, 10 p.m., phone in the kitchen for the night. Yes, I agree. But there are parents, part of it, one of the key things, if anyone of you, a lot of high school people out here tonight, but if you have kids who are younger, start the discussion about the boundaries around the devices early. I mean, to me, like as soon as you give them a phone, it's not no holds barred, sky's the limit. It's like I watch my sister and siblings with their kids, and screen time is constrained. And eventually, once they get into later high school, it really is up to them because you can't control, they're on their own, they're seeing friends and driving around. But having discussions around the boundaries, you modeling good behavior, good boundaries with your devices. When you put them down at dinner, they go down certain days in the week, like the phones go away for a time. We're going to be in nature as phones are off. Like we show them there's time for the phones. They're a great tool and resource and they can connect, but then there's time to turn them off. And sleep is a priority. And reading a book, I get tired within 10 pages. On a device, it's stimulating. It's going to get there's the blue light, which delays things a little bit, coming from the screen, that 5,000 Kelvin plus, which imitates the sun's the temperature and rays, which signals to our iris to inhibit to turn down the melatonin production. So there is something there that delays sleep by a little bit, not like a huge amount, but by a little bit. And then also it's just more cognitively engaging to be taught looking at a video or thing versus reading a book. So learning how to put this down when you're starting to wind your brain down, and then you get better sleep. And that's very important because sleep is part of mental health too. So, but yeah, Angela, I think it's excellent. You've done this, 10 o'clock, it's done, it's over. And then weekends, different boundaries, but during the weekday, school nights, this is how we do it in this house. And you as parents model the same thing. All our phones docked together in a row. All right. So it's 9 o'clock. That's good timing, y'all. So everybody, I want you to have a good night. If you need any kind of help whatsoever with academics or those kind of things, let us know. We are available. And thanks for coming out tonight, everyone. Hope you learned something. And everybody have a good balanced night, good balanced sleep. All right, y'all. Take care. Good night.